Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something absolutely crucial for anyone trying to build a business. We're going to distill decades of academic research into a highly practical roadmap for your startup's journey to the market. We're focusing squarely on the core marketing theories in entrepreneurship, essentially bridging that massive gap between high-level academic frameworks and the gritty, everyday reality of building a company.
So let's kick things off with a question that honestly haunts just about every aspiring founder. You know the story, right? You've probably seen it happen firsthand. A brilliant technological breakthrough goes absolutely nowhere, while a seemingly basic, almost inferior alternative completely takes over the world. Well, the answer isn't just about having the best tech. It actually lies in understanding the precise life cycle of market adoption and the deep psychology of your buyers.
To unpack this, here is our agenda for today, recovering the complete arc of a business, building trust and legitimacy, timing your market entry, solving the customer struggle, crossing the growth chasm, and expanding your brand empire.
Okay, starting right off with Section 1, building trust and legitimacy, passing the social audit.
Here's the hard truth. Before you can even think about selling a product, you have to convince the market you actually have the right to exist. Social judgment theory tells us that stakeholders, and we're talking investors, early customers, suppliers, they all perform a sort of social audit on your startup. They are looking for legitimacy before they risk a single dollar or a minute of their time on you. Because let's face it, an entirely new venture is inherently risky. So until you pass this social audit and prove your social fitness, the market is going to withhold the exact resources you desperately need to survive.
So how do you overcome this? Well, signaling theory solves what we call information asymmetry. As a founder, you know your startup's true potential, but outside investors don't. They're completely in the dark. To bridge that gap, you have to send signals. But listen, they cannot just be cheap talk. You have to send costly, observable signals to prove your quality. You've got to do things that a low-quality founder literally couldn't afford to fake. Think about investing your own life savings to show you have real skin in the game, or grinding to secure a highly difficult patent. These are the costly signals that give the market the confidence to actually endorse you.
Which brings us to Section 2, timing your market entry and tackling the first mover myth.
So, the million-dollar question, do you launch first or do you wait? We are always taught that being first is best, right? The early bird gets the worm. And yeah, sometimes it is. When Sony launched the Walkman back in 1979, they effectively created the portable audio market. They rode the manufacturing experience curve down so fast that competitors simply couldn't catch their pricing. But fast forward to the digital era. Early MP3 pioneers in the 90s, like Diamond Multimedia, bore all the devastating, non-recoverable costs of the industry's early fermentation stage. They spent millions just educating consumers on what an MP3 even was. Then Apple comes along in 2001 acting as the ultimate fast follower. They let those early pioneers absorb all the heavy costs before jumping in with the iPod to completely dominate a now mature, educated ecosystem.
This is a brilliant illustration of the free rider effect. Being a first mover can actually be a massive disadvantage if you're the one footing the bill for all the basic research, navigating the messy early regulatory hurdles, and trying to educate a confused customer base. The fast follower? They get to sit back, watch the pioneer stumble down all the technological dead ends, reverse engineer their failures, and then enter the market with a highly polished product and virtually zero exploratory friction. But deciding whether to go first or second really comes down to David Teese's framework. Teese proves that without complementary assets, things like entrenched logistics, manufacturing power, or existing commercial contracts, legacy incumbents are just going to crush the pioneer. Imagine a startup inventing a brand new rapid consumer testing method. Even if they're the absolute first to market, incumbents like Quest Diagnostics have an insurmountable distribution network of drop-off centers and courier routes. If our startup can't defend its first-mover status with its own assets, the incumbent will simply copy the tech, plug it into their massive network, and win the game.
All right, Section 3, solving the customer's struggle, focusing on the jobs to be done framework.
When you finally do enter the market, you absolutely need to know why people are buying what you're selling. Clayton Christensen's famous jobs to be done theory asks us to completely ignore traditional demographics. Forget about age, forget about zip codes. Instead, start looking at the specific struggling moments in a customer's life. Because customers don't really just buy products, they hire them to make progress in a very specific circumstance.
Think about a standard drill bit. Honestly, nobody actually wants to own a quarter-inch piece of spiraled metal. They just want a quarter-inch hole in their wall so they can hang a picture of their family. That is the real job. Or take Christensen's famous milkshake case study. Fast food chains spent months trying to make their milkshakes thicker or sweeter to boost sales, and literally nothing worked. That is, until they realized early morning commuters didn't want a milkshake for the flavor. They were hiring the milkshake as a mess-free, long-lasting commute companion just to stave off boredom in the car. Once you define the actual job, the pathway to real innovation just reveals itself.
Moving right along to Section 4, crossing the growth chasm from niche to mainstream.
So you've built your product to solve a real job, and your early enthusiasts absolutely love it. But then, suddenly, your sales completely stall. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the technology adoption lifecycle. Everett Rogers discovered that innovations diffuse through 5 distinct statistical groups, starting with the visionary innovators and ending with the highly skeptical laggards. But later on, Geoffrey Moore analyzed this exact curve for high-tech startups and found a terrifying trap hidden right in the middle of those early stages. Moore warns us that most startups actually die right here, in what he calls the chasm. It's this massive, silent gap between the early adopters and the early majority. And why is it so deadly? Well, because what an early adopter desperately wants, which is revolutionary, untested, exciting change, is exactly what an early majority customer deeply fears. The mainstream pragmatists. They just want social proof. They want reliability, guaranteed solutions. They definitely do not want to be your science experiment. To cross this gap, you have to stop trying to be everyone to everyone. It's a trap. Instead, you have to act like an invading army and employ a beachhead strategy. This means focusing all of your limited startup resources on dominating one single, highly specific niche. This is exactly what Salesforce did back in the late 90s. Instead of trying to cross the chasm by pitching these hyper-risk-averse corporate IT directors who are fiercely defending their legacy systems, Mark Benioff bypassed them entirely. He secured his beachhead by targeting frustrated frontline sales managers, offering them a plug-and-play solution they could just fund from their own local team budgets. Dominating that local niche created the exact social proof they needed to eventually win over the entire mainstream enterprise market.
But to truly win over those pragmatists, you also have to offer the whole product. A pragmatist is not going to buy your software if they have to go out and buy 5 other things just to make it work. It has to be a 100% complete solution. This is precisely why Tesla had to build the global supercharger network instead of just selling standalone electric cars. Early adopters, sure, they tolerated range anxiety. The mainstream majority absolutely would not. Tesla had to provide the entire whole product ecosystem to bridge that adoption gap.
And that leads perfectly into our final stop, Section 5, expanding your brand empire and the limits of trust.
Once you've crossed the chasm and dominated the mainstream, your final step is scaling your empire efficiently. And the smartest way to do that is through brand extension. This is an incredible survival mechanism for entrepreneurs because it essentially lets you borrow the trust you've already established to bypass market friction. So instead of spending millions building brand awareness from scratch in a totally new category, you just recycle your most valuable asset, customer trust. Think about how Jessica Alba stretched the uncompromised transparency of the Honest Company's baby care line directly into honest beauty. She leveraged that existing trust to massively reduce the perceived risk for consumers trying out her new cosmetics.
But wait, social judgment theory warns us that brand extension has very strict limits. If the extension violates the psychological identity of the parent brand, it's going to fail horribly. You can't just slap your trusted logo on literally anything. There has to be a perceived category fit, or else you trigger massive cognitive dissonance in your buyers.
Take a look at Colgate's attempt to sell frozen dinners back in the 1980s. I mean, it was a total disaster. The logic probably made total sense to corporate accountants who just wanted to leverage a famous household name in the food retail space, but the complete lack of perceived category fit totally poisoned consumer appetite. Because think about it, people associate the Colgate brand with a minty, chemical taste and spitting something out into a sink, not exactly what you want to think about when eating a hot lasagna. Trust simply cannot be recycled if the extension actively corrupts the psychological identity of your brand.
Now, as your empire smoothly expands, especially if you happen to be building digital platforms, you're inevitably going to encounter the Pareto principle. We all know it as the 80-20 rule, which basically states that 80% of consequences come from 20% of causes. In startup ecosystems, this power law is often even more brutally skewed.
We used to think the internet would flatten the market entirely, right? Moving us from a world of just a few blockbuster hits to a massive long tail of millions of successful niche products. But recent research, like a fascinating 2024 study by Gala and colleagues, confirms that even on digital platforms with near infinite shelf space, the power law absolutely still reigns supreme. performance heavily follows a heavy-tailed distribution. That means success and revenue remain massively skewed toward a tiny fraction of star entrepreneurs. The long tail definitely exists, but the biggest rewards are still being captured by a very, very small percentage of top performers who figure out how to aggregate those niches effectively.
Wow. Okay. We've explored an immense amount of ground today. Everything from signaling trust to navigating that deadly chasm, all the way to safely stretching your brand identity. Understanding these marketing theories gives you a massive strategic advantage over founders who are out there just guessing. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought for your own startup journey. What unique job is the market waiting to hire you for, and how exactly will you signal to them that you are the only one who can do it?